Hey 12U. So we're continuing on with homeostasis, and we're into the nervous system. Okay, we're going to start with the nervous system, and today we're going to kind of go over the basics of the nervous system. So in my previous lecture, we talked about kind of homeostasis in general, talking about how everything works, whether we're talking about the nervous or the endocrine or the excretory. They all work on those feedback system. Today we're going to kind of focus specifically on the nervous system, and our first lecture here on the nervous system is going to be kind of just the basics. So, the basic components, how it's organized, and then, how the nervous system functions, what type of cells, which are called neurons. Okay? So, it's kind of a shorter lecture, but this kind of just outlines, the basics of it, and we'll go more into depth. So let's take a look at this lecture here. Okay, so the basics of the nervous system. We're going to have two parts. Okay, we have the central nervous system and then our peripheral. Okay, and that's what our first slide is. So the nervous system is broken down into two main components. Okay, now the central nervous system doesn't get broken down any further. I mean, you can break it down to the brain and the spinal cord. This peripheral nervous system gets broken down a lot more. Okay, there's some categories and then subcategories and subcategories. But the two main systems of the nervous system are the central nervous system, which we call the CNS, and then the peripheral nervous system, which we call the PNS. Okay. So the central nervous system, I'm going to talk a lot more in depth. We're going to have a whole lecture on the central nervous system. But generally, there's two parts of it. Okay, it's the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, those are the two parts. So just this brain and then your spinal cord going down. None of these nerves right out here. It's just the brain and then the spinal cord. So the main purpose of the central nervous system is to receive sensory information. It doesn't detect it. Okay? That's the peripheral. It doesn't detect pain. It only receives sensory information. So a sense, like say you touch something, it'll be touched by your finger, and you'll send that to your CNS. So it receives sensory information from the peripheral nervous system and sends information to the peripheral nerve. So if you have something in your brain and you want to send a message to your heart, okay, your brain is going to send the message down your spinal cord, and then it's going to go out to your heart. Okay. Now, when we talk about sensors, controllers, and effectors, the central nervous system is often the control center of feedback loops. Okay, so whether you're a negative or a positive feedback loop, the CNS is usually the control center of that feedback loop. Okay. The peripheral nervous system are the nerves running from the peripheral part of the body to the CNS. So here's the peripheral part of your body, and they're the nerves running to the spinal cord, okay, or to the brain. We call those peripheral nerves because they're on the peripheral part of your body. Okay. They're often part of the sensor and the effector of feedback loops. Okay. Now, we have the peripheral nervous system subdivided into two different systems, the peripheral somatic and then the peripheral autonomic. Okay. So the nervous system gets broken down into CNS and PNS. We're now in the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, and it gets broken down into peripheral somatic and peripheral autonomic. Okay, I know it's a lot of terminology, but that's what biology is. Okay, so the somatic nervous system consists of sensory receptors in the head and the extremities, and it's responsible for sending sensory information to the CNS and responding to instructions from the CNS. This is the key part, and if you were highlighting things, and again, I suggest you printing out these 6 slides per page or 3 slides per page and highlighting. You want to highlight this part right here. It's under voluntary control. So our somatic nervous system is the things that we want to do. Like if I want to move my arm, okay, if I want to move my arm, I'm going to send the message from my brain down my spinal cord and then out one of these peripheral nerves, and it will be a somatic peripheral nerve because I'm controlling it. Okay, it's under voluntary control. That's the big thing. So if I want to move my finger right now, that action came from your brain, CNS to your finger via somatic nervous system. Now, on the other end of things, we've got the autonomic nervous system. Okay, and it controls non-voluntary secretions of hormones and muscle contractions. Okay, so this is the part that's automatically done for us. It's things like breathing. It's things for like your heartbeat. It's like contracting your pupils the right size. It's like turning on and off your digestion. These are things automatically done. Okay? Now, in our autonomic nervous system, it gets again broken down into two subcategories, which are the sympathetic autonomic and the parasympathetic autonomic nervous systems. And these systems work to reverse each other. Okay? Now we're going to go again in more in depth in this, but I'm just kind of giving you an overview. So if you've ever heard of the fight or flight or the sit and digest, these are two systems that our body basically responds to. So in a stressful situation, we have a whole bunch of things that are going to happen to our body, okay, in order to prepare us for a fight, if we have to fight somebody, or if we are going to flee and we are going to run away. Okay? So there's a whole bunch of things that happen to our body if we're going to prepare for that. Now, when we need to calm back down, say we don't actually need to fight or we don't actually need to flee, say it was a false alarm, then we have to have a whole bunch of things that happen to us in order to relax again. Okay? And that's our sit and digest. Okay? Now, we have two systems that do the opposite. Sympathetic prepares us for fight or flight, and it's going to do things like dilate our pupils, stop digestion, therefore inhibit saliva, inhibit your stomach. It's going to basically increase the oxygen levels, increase your heart rate. These are all things preparing you for a fight or a flight. After you realize that you don't need to fight or you don't need to flee, you need to relax a little bit, your parasympathetic nervous system comes down, and this is responsible for calming you down. Okay? I know this is a lot to take in, but we're just going to go doing an overview here. So there's kind of a big picture of it. So if you need to fight or flight, that's going to be your sympathetic, and all of these things are going to happen to you. Okay? And you should read over these. And if you don't need to fight, you need to relax again, like say you're about to go to sleep, all of these things are going to become activated. Okay, so examples of our autonomic nervous system include breathing, intestine contraction, heartbeat contractions, eyeball contractions. Okay, they're all coming from the CNS, but it's autonomic. Okay, you don't need to think about it; it will just happen. So there's a good video to watch. It's the crash course video. So I strongly suggest you look up crash course in the nervous system. Okay, and they go through it. So the next part about the basics of the nervous system we need to go over is our cell types, and we've got two types. We've got neurons, and they're the main type. They're the ones that are going to send all of our signals together. Okay, they're basic structural unit of the nervous system. If you have a bunch of neurons together, they're called a nerve. Okay, and that's what you've probably heard before. There's other types of cells in our nervous system. They're called glial cells, and they're only responsible for maintenance of the neuron cells. Okay, so they nourish, protect, and remove the waste of neuron cells. So those are our two cells. Okay, and this is an important little diagram right here. Okay, so you should know the labels on this diagram. So you should know, so here is a cell. This whole thing, this whole orange thing is one cell. I know it looks really weird, but it's a cell. It's going to have a mitochondria. It's going to have Golgi apparatuses and vacuoles and all the things we talked about in the cell. They just look very odd. Okay? Now there's a couple extra things that we have on here. We call them dendrites. So that's where, here's the cell head or the cell body. Okay? Here's our nucleus inside here. And the arms that are kind of attached to the cell body or the cell head are called the dendrites. And then the kind of extensions on the end are called the axon terminals. Okay? This whole little line here is called the axon. Okay? And then here's some glial cells that are talking about that are just kind of protecting it. Okay? And they're helping maintain it. Now, neurons are cells and therefore contain the basic cell needs. I just talked about that. These are the parts that we need to know right here. Okay? And here's a better kind of diagram. The dendrites, the nucleus, here's the cell body. Here's our axon. The whole kind of thing is the axon. Okay, you don't need to know what Schwann cells are. Here's our axon terminal. Okay, it's just at the very end of the axon. You don't need to know the nodes of Ranvier. Okay, and then myelin sheath. We will talk about myelin. Myelin's a way of basically keeping the signal going. Okay. So here's our types of neurons. Okay, and this is based on structure. So we've got neurons that kind of look all different. These are our multipolar neurons. Okay, and if you look up here, they're the ones that kind of have lots of different kind of heads on them. Okay, we've got our bipolar neurons, which just look a little bit different. Okay, they've got the head kind of on one end, and they don't have as many dendrites on them. But otherwise, they look exactly the same as these. They just don't have as many dendrites. And then over here, the unipolar ones are kind of have the head in the middle of the neuron. Okay, and those are our three different types. Okay, I'm not going to ask you a lot on this slide, on the structure. The next slide is what I'm going to ask you more on. Neurons based on function. We've got three basic types of neurons. We've got sensory neurons, right? And they're the neurons responsible for sending impulses from sensors to the CNS, so you need to know that. We've got integration neurons, and they're the ones that are in the CNS, and they're at the control center, responsible for processing sensory information and formulating a response. And then we've got the motor output, receives a signal from the CNS to activate effectors. So really, when you look at the feedback systems, we've got sensor neurons. We've got control center, and they're the integration neurons. And then we've got effector, and those are the motor output neurons. And those are the three that I really want you guys to focus on. Okay, so that's the basics of the neurosystem. The next part that we're going to go over, and we will go over that tomorrow, is we're going to talk about how nerves work. Now, I'm not going to go too much in action potentials. If you look in the content section, there's a lot on action potentials. I'm not going to really focus on action potentials. It's not really required for first year. So I'm going to more focus on where one nerve ends, the next nerve begins, and that's like the synaptic transmission. Okay, so that's it for today, is just the 2 lectures, and then tomorrow we'll continue on. And again, it's going to be kind of lecture-based. There's not going to be a lot of I wouldn't say there's not a lot of homework. There's not going to be a lot of activities that you hand in. In our last unit, I usually try and keep it a little bit light in terms of workload, because I know that you're going to have English ISPs, or you're going to have history ISPs, or all your other courses kind of put a lot of work in the end. We don't usually do that in biology, so I usually try and keep this last unit a little bit lighter, and more a little bit lecture-based.